Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad you're here. We're going to be learning about backyard birding today. Matthew Magoc, thank you for being with us and being our presenter. If you'll kick us off with no further ado.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Like Andrea said, we're going to be talking about backyard birding today. This is pretty entry-level stuff, so if you're an advanced birder, you may feel free to add any comments or suggestions as we go along into the chat box. I don't want this strictly to be me exerting all of my knowledge. If you feel like you have some knowledge to add, by all means, feel free to add it. The big thing with birding, and the big thing that I'd like to keep this conversation and this PowerPoint light, is to keep it fun. Birding doesn't have to be this stuffy thing that you do by yourself. Let's have some fun. And I am so glad that we have some younger guests listening in today, because I have some jokes to start off with that may fall on some deaf ears. It's really for the younger crowd there. So in light of the ongoing construction at Ridgeway, or at the garden, one of my favorite bird jokes is, what kind of bird do you think currently works at the garden and our construction site? And I'm so glad that I don't get to see all of the eye rolls, because the answer is the crane. And don't worry, I got one more joke for you to kind of set the mood. What do you give a sick bird? A tweetment. So, yes. And then as I saw M, you chatted, you noticed my little friend here. No, it's not a real live bird. It's just my little bird friend that I bring out when it's like Talk Like a Pirate Day, or in this case, today. So before we get started, I would like to ask Andrea to put up a poll question. And the poll question is for two purposes. One, to see what your knowledge is on birds, and if you have a really large knowledge base right now, I could kind of tweak as I go on with some of my words or with some of my presentation. Or if you're a little more in the lower end of the numbers, which is totally okay, it just helps me make my presentation a little more authentic to you and make it a valuable learning experience. I will say, whatever your answer is, you will probably know that whatever your answer is, you're going to know more birds than you think you do. And especially as you go through some of them, you're like, oh, I knew that one. I knew that one. And also to get a little practice in using that chat box, feel free to, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there. Or if you have any burning questions before we get started, feel free to throw them in there as well. With that, I'm going to leave the poll question up for a little bit. Andrea, whenever we get those results, if you don't mind to shout them out to me.
Yes. Can you guys see the live poll? There's a live feed going on. I don't know if that's, can anyone see that on the screen? Yes to poll. Great. Okay, so you see that your colleagues, there's kind of a mix here of bird knowledge and confidence in birds.
Great.
So we're gonna get, so almost 80% people have voted. Let's just take like 3 more seconds and then we're going to end. Excellent. So so 45% here are between can identify 5 to 10 species of birds.
Great. Yeah, so I don't think I have to tweak much for our talk. That's kind of what I was thinking. So perfect. Thank you all that were able to vote. And if you weren't able to vote, it's okay. In all honesty, it was just me being kind of nosy in a sense, where I just didn't want to make sure that I wasn't talking over or under anybody's knowledge base. So cool, I think we're good. So for today, for our talk here, we're going to go in a brief introduction of birds and people, kind of how we all interact with birds and how birds help us. We'll jump into a brief talk about migration. That gives us the background knowledge that we need in order to kind of start thinking about looking at birds and when to expect to see birds, how to expect to see birds, etc. From there, we'll jump into looking at field guides and how to use binoculars. Again, all important stuff if we're going to be looking at birds. Finally, we'll get to 10 birds of the backyard. These are just 10 birds that, it's a mixture of birds that I think that some people may know and some that you may not know. Again, just trying to get your confidence up that you know more than you think you do. So there's some easier ones in there and some new ones that I put in there. Just that I know you'll have the opportunity to see those birds no matter where you live. And then we'll go to the end where we'll figure out how we can attract birds and do a little bit of citizen science with that as well. So with that, birds and people. Why do people watch birds? Well, for one, it's an incredibly easy thing to do. You could watch birds just about anywhere you are. Sitting in your window or sitting at your door, looking out your window, going on a walk, in urban, suburban, rural, no matter where you are, you will be able to see birds. And so that gives us something to do. A lot of people do enjoy watching birds because it is something to do. I know this morning on my little morning walk, I saw a bunch of different species of birds. But what I did not see was an elk or a white-tailed deer run through. So they're very visible. So no matter where you are, you'll be able to see them. They also provide a service. So we often think of turkey vultures, and we kind of like turn up our nose when we see turkey vultures and scavenging roadkill. And then we look at them and they're like, oh, look at this ugly looking bird. Turkey vultures have a very valuable role to play for humans. I forget what study this was and where it was out of, but it was something like a little over $11,000 per turkey. Each turkey vulture provides humans $11,000 worth of cleanup duty by going around eating this roadkill. So if you're looking at it from an economic standpoint, the birds have an economic value, and especially one that a lot of people don't think of as a desirable bird. So that turkey vulture, next time you see it, in its lifetime, that turkey vulture is going to provide us as humans $11,000 worth of value. A lot of people like to feed birds. It's a relatively new thing where humans have been providing food for the birds. It started around the 1950s or so. But today, an average household will provide up to about 50 pounds of supplemental food for the birds each year. So again, from an economic standpoint, we as humans are providing birds plenty of supplemental food source, but also putting that into the local economy as well. All right, let's go on here. So when we start thinking about birds, we quickly get overwhelmed with the numbers. In Missouri alone, there has been 406 species of birds officially recorded and verified. Now that's a lot of birds. Again, this is an entry-level bird talk, so we're not going into that hardcore depth of looking at all 406 species. If you break that down, there's going to be a lot of birds that come in that are rare. There's going to be some birds that are extinct in there. If you break that down to like summer, since we're in summer right now, we're at about 150 species throughout the state of Missouri right now. That's in general, give or take, plus or minus a few. But in general, we'll have about 150 birds in Missouri, different species of birds right now. In the winter, we get an uptick of species. There's about 152 or so species of birds that overwinter in Missouri. So again, that's a good deal number of birds that we have. That would quickly overwhelm any beginner birder trying to wrap your head around 150 different species of birds. Don't be alarmed. We're going to break that down to a very manageable number, and we're just going to piggyback up to it. So breaking out that 150 different species that we could possibly see in Missouri, the list that you see here, those are the top 20 species of birds commonly reported on eBird throughout the state of Missouri. Now, it's important to know that these are birds that have been observed by people participating in eBird, which we'll get to eBird in a little bit. So it doesn't necessarily represent that there is the most northern, so like number one, it's northern cardinal. That doesn't mean that throughout the state of Missouri, the highest likely bird species you're going to come across is the northern cardinal. What it means is, out of all of the checklists that were submitted to eBird, the northern cardinal came up most frequently. Again, so with eBird, it's a citizen science platform. So the information that you get in is provided by citizens like us. So sometimes it's not always 100% accurate. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later today. But what I would like to draw your attention to here is we see that number 9, the American crow. That's probably a really close, accurate account for all of the American crows that have been spotted on eBird checklists. But what a lot of people don't realize is there are actually 2 species of crows that we could see, especially in the St. Louis area. There's an American crow and a fish crow. They look identical, so sometimes somebody may accidentally upload data from a fish crow and put it on the American crow just because they didn't make that connection that, hey, there is actually a second species of crow in the state. Same thing with number 17, the black-capped chickadee. We'll go into more depth about this one, but the black-capped chickadee, we have 2 chickadee species here in Missouri as well. If you're north of St. Louis, those are black-capped chickadees. South of St. Louis, those are Carolina chickadees. That's confusing. We'll look at a visual of it later. But again, if you didn't know that, you may just lump all of them in as black-capped chickadee because that's the most common one that we think of. So again, this is really good data, but it's not the end-all be-all. It gives us a place to start. Also, so if you're curious about birds at the garden, I'm trying to tie this back into your volunteering roles in the garden, next time you're out there, there are about 153 different species of birds spotted at the garden. Just right down the road at Tower Grove Park, there's been about 194 species spotted. So I would probably venture to say there are more birds at the garden than this 153 species that have been spotted on eBird. Common birds that you could be on the lookout for, just like our last list of 20 throughout the state of Missouri. In the garden, something to keep a lookout for. No matter where you go within the garden grounds, you'll probably see the good old Canada goose and the mallard, especially if we were on the grounds now, you'd probably see them nesting. Chimney swifts, this is a bird that we'll talk about later. You'll see them flying around. Again, these are all just, if you're interested, and whenever we get back onto the garden grounds, if you're interested in trying to figure out what birds are on your garden grounds versus ones that you may see in your backyard, here's a good just little something to look forward to. So birds are a bellwether species, or a bioindicator, as Rachel Carlson would put. They let us know what's going on throughout the environment. So birds, they're worldwide. So they let us know what kind of environmental changes are occurring. One of the most common things that we think about when we think of birds as a bellwether species or a bioindicator is DDT and the bald eagles. The chemical DDT was sprayed, excuse me, it was sprayed, bald eagles, they would ingest some of the food, they would ingest food that was contaminated with that DDT. When the bald eagle would lay their eggshells were so thin that when they sat to incubate the egg, it would crack. Ornithologists, scientists, researchers quickly realized that there was a problem going on right in the general vicinity of what's causing that bird egg to crack when they're being incubated. Through research, we found out that was a side effect of DDT. And because of that, we banned the use of DDT. Other things, they could be early warning systems for like climate change, be habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is probably one of the biggest environmental change occurring to the bird world right now. And just general other pesticides use. So yeah, so they are really good. They're a really good use for science as well. So going on to birds and people, again, birds have fascinated humans for a very long time. Something that a lot of people may not know is if you're wearing jeans, that zipper that you have on your jeans, that was invented by looking at a model of feathers. So on feathers, if you pull the little barbels off of a feather, they interlock, and that's how they stay together. Think of your zipper, how your zipper interlocks, and that's how it keeps things closed. Leonardo da Vinci was obsessed with looking at birds and bats and trying to figure out how humans could fly. The picture that you see there is one of Da Vinci's flying machines. The idea with Da Vinci was he was trying to understand how birds and bats flew and how we could model that. So his flying machine there was just a big giant wooden frame where a human could lay down in there and pretty much, in this case, I think he had cranks and pulleys. In other drawings, you would flap your arms. Again, just trying to loosely understanding the anatomy of flight, but really wanted to dive into it. I put this one in, I think M is on, so I put this one in here too, because I always chuckle when I think of her in Victoria, well, I always chuckle when I think of M in Victoria humans, because from the Victorian time frame, we have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So back in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, birds were actually being shot for their feathers. And those feathers were being used to don women's hats. And it was a status symbol if you had a lot of different bird feathers on your hat as you're walking around New York City, wherever you were going. In London, on the commercial sales rooms in the auction blocks there, in 1902, they had 1,608 packages sold of heron plumes. A package roughly contained about 30 ounces of bird feathers. So if we're going to do some quick math here, that's nearly 48,000 or just over 48,000 ounces of bird feathers. And to get an ounce of bird feathers, it took 4 birds. So we're looking at 190,000 herons were needed to get 1,600 packages of bird feathers on the commercial trade floors. That's astronomical numbers. And that was, I mean, we're just looking at herons there, but that was going on with all sorts of different birds. A lot of our migratory birds were specifically harvested because they had beautiful feathers. So because of that, in 1918, we created, with England, the United States and Great Britain signed a treaty. And the treaty was with Great Britain, as Canada was a colony at that time, to protect migratory birds. So in 1918, Congress passed the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which makes it a crime to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, or sell any migratory bird and its parts, including its nest, eggs, and feathers. Now that's an interesting thing to think about because I am probably like everybody else have picked up bird feathers at one time and brought them home, had them as decorations or whatever. Technically, that is in violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Oftentimes when I mention that, a lot of people will ask, well, I could buy feathers at like a craft store or local thrift store or whatever. Those feathers are probably from domesticated or farmed animals. That's why we could get those feathers. It's like your goose down pillows or blankets or whatever. Those goose feathers are from farmed geese, not necessarily migratory geese. So I don't want to alarm anybody thinking that the feathers that you have are illegal. I don't think that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife are going to come busting down our doors and get us for a feather. But just don't sell that feather. That'll be the big thing. Don't sell that feather. So that's a little bit about a background on birds and kind of where we're at today. To study birds, ornithologists and researchers have broken North America into 4 different flyways. Generally speaking, a flyway is just a generic path that a particular bird species uses or a group of bird species use during their migration. Going from left to right, on our left-hand side, we see the Pacific Flyway. So that will be bordered by the Pacific Ocean and the Rocky Mountains. So imagine that line that I have in there, that being the Rocky Mountains. So anything that's on the western side of the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, they would fall into the Pacific Flyway. You'll see the same thing on the Atlantic flyway. Sorry, jumping all the way across the North America there. So the Atlantic flyway, that's bordered by the Atlantic Ocean. And then if you know the mountain range that is there, that will be the Appalachian Mountain Range. So the mountain ranges in the oceans kind of make a natural corridor. It's very, 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 very hard for a bird to go over either of those mountain ranges. So generally speaking, if the bird is in the Pacific flyway or the Atlantic flyway, it'll stay within those flyways. Where it gets a little more muddled is here in the central United States, where we have the Central Flyway and the Mississippi Flyway. The Central Flyway, think of like the Great Plains. It's like the Dakotas, Nebraska area, Kansas, into Texas. And then the Mississippi Flyway, which is where we will be found, or where St. Louis is, that's defined by the Mississippi River and its tributaries. Again, so especially when you get north into the breeding grounds, there's a lot of overlap of birds that are found in the Central Flyway and the Mississippi Flyway. Again, it's just a generalization. It's just a way for researchers to kind of narrow down and track birds. So if we look specifically at our Mississippi Flyway, again, you'll notice that we're going to be looking at, let me catch up here on the clicks. So here we go, caught up. So on the Mississippi Flyway, again, you're going to use the Mississippi River as our main migratory route. The birds will use that river system going south and north. It's really interesting. They will use the Missouri side going down in the fall, oftentimes. In the fall, they'll use the Missouri side of the Mississippi. And then on the spring migration coming back up, they'll use more so the Illinois side. I don't really know why that is. It was just an interesting note that I had found way back when I was doing a lot of bird research. So our pride and joy with the Mississippi Flyway is ducks. If you love ducks, the Mississippi Flyway is the place to be. 40% of all North American waterfowl will use the Mississippi Flyway. So right now, a lot of the ducks will be breeding up in the Dakotas, Minnesota, the Great Lakes region, up into northern Canada as well. Come migration time, they will just fly down following either the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, and just pool up in really, really large numbers. This little blue-winged teal that you got a picture of, that one is actually a breeding male. Not too often do we get blue-winged teals breeding here. They usually breed a little farther up north, but during migration, you'll definitely see blue-winged teal. And with migration, you will be able to see birds traveling on radar. So on our top picture here, this is a picture from NASA, and looking at their radar systems. All of those small little circles you see, those are radar stations, and all around that, the light blue, those are all birds flying at just after sunset. And that's interesting to note because during migration, birds will either take off during sunrise and fly throughout the whole day, or take off during sunset and fly during the whole night. Here at sunset, we're seeing a lot of birds getting ready to take off, and probably, with it being fall, just after sunset, they're probably taking off of their resting grounds to continue their migration south. We know, based off of migration, that the birds that are taking off just after sunset, those are going to be our passerines, so our smaller songbirds, our sparrows, those little friends. And they're flying at night because the cooler weather, it makes migration a little more efficient for them. And it is also because of the predators. So their big predator is hawks, swifts, and swallows. Yeah, thank you. So our passerines, hawks, swifts, they love to go after some of our passerines, especially during migration, since it's such a hard journey and such a hard experience. So our hawks, swift, and swallows, they're going to go during the day because it's more efficient for them to fly during the day, riding on the thermals and the winds. So while they're flying, our passerines are resting. When our hawks and swifts and all the other kind of bigger birds, when they're resting, our passerines take off, fly down as well. Since migration is such a hard journey, they want to take as many precautions as they possibly can. And again, you could even see this on local radar. I know that big giant picture up of all of North America, we saw migration happening there. Even on local radar, if you like Google a YouTube video, you could see weather people talking about local birds showing up on local radar stations as well. So that's a picture of migration occurring in Arizona. I think it's right outside of Tucson. Some fun facts, some things that I love talking about. This picture is a picture of American coots. There's that old saying, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, American coots are the example of that and kind of throws that whole old saying out the window. American coots will raft up in Missouri in winter. They will be in rafts of thousands. It's just a huge mass of birds. They float on the water. But they're actually not even closely related to ducks. They're they are closer related to like cranes than they are waterfowl. So they're way, way farther down the evolutionary chain there. So that's always kind of fun when somebody says, oh, hey, look at all those ducks. And I get to say, well, you know, they're actually not really a duck. Other fun facts to think about. We at this house love putting out our hummingbird feeders in September, and we love seeing all the hummingbirds come and just dive bomb each other, fighting over the hummingbird foods. I like putting out as many as I can because I feel for those little birds. So those guys, when they're migrating, so they're going to come through, let's say St. Louis, they're fueling up for their journey to the Yucatan Peninsula. So quick geography lesson, Yucatan Peninsula is on the Gulf Coast in Mexico. So you're thinking, well, how does a particular bird species like the ruby-throated hummingbird come from St. Louis to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico? Well, they have to cross the Gulf of Mexico. So that's about a 500-mile stretch of open water that these little hummingbirds have to go on. It's incredible to think about. I mean, you're talking about a full 24-hour plus journey across the Gulf of Mexico, nonstop. And you're talking about a 4-gram bird and all the energy that must exude. It's so incredible to think about. And that's not even taking into account weather. Like what happens if there's a storm that comes up in the Gulf during peak migration? What happens to those birds? It's just incredible to think about. And with that, that's why I do like to put out as many hummingbird feeders as I can. So I do like to give them as much help as I possibly can. Speaking about migration journeys, you may be thinking, wow, that's an incredible journey, 600 miles. What is the longest recorded migration of any bird? That particular species is the Arctic tern. Excuse me. So the Arctic tern, that'll probably fly just over 49,000 miles a year. So that particular species makes a round trip from the Arctic to Antarctic and back and forth. So they pretty much never get to see winter. So they get summer year round. And over its lifespan of about 25 to 30 years, that bird's making that journey. That's about the equivalent to 2 or 3 trips to the moon and back. Just incredible to think about. All right, so we talked about migration and some fun facts there. Let's move on to some tools for bird ID. So that's a little bit, so I gave you a little bit of background on birds. So now we're gonna shift focus on trying to figure out what birds we have in our backyard. So I do have to give kudos to Don for doctoring the photo that Andrea had sent out with the little Tweety bird in there. He sent it over to me and I loved it so much that I had to throw it in there. So kudos, Don, for your photoshopping ability. The first thing that a lot of people, when you talk about birding, ask is, what kind of binoculars do I need? If you go online or go to a sporting goods store, you could quickly become overwhelmed with binoculars. what I generally say, if you're an adult, is get the most expensive binoculars that you could afford. So if you could have afford a $50 pair of binoculars, by all means, that's the pair you should go with. With optics, the more expensive you go, the better the quality is. But today, with a lot of these optics, you could get a really, really good pair of binoculars for around $100 that have a lifetime warranty. So the binoculars in the picture that I'm using there, those are Vortex Diamondbacks. Personal, I'm going to cover up my logo, personal plug. I love my Vortex. They have a lifetime warranty. If you drop them or something happens to them, you just ship, and the binocular breaks, you just ship it back to them and they give you a new pair if they can't fix it. It's incredible. So if you're looking on a budget, look at warranties like that because things do happen. I would also always recommend wearing your binocular straps. So when you're looking at binoculars, one of the first things that you want to look at is you'll see two numbers. You'll see a number, then the letter X, and then another number. So that 8X or 10X or 12X, whatever that number is, that is the ocular lens. So that's how many times the binocular is going to magnify that image versus what you would normally see if you didn't have a binocular. For beginning birding and for birders in general, 8X or magnification of 8 is about the highest you need to go. A slower magnification allows you to follow a bird as it flies a little easier than the higher magnification. If you're really get into birding, the 10Xs are really good as well to get out for more stationary birds that are a little farther away. So I think like waterfowl, cranes, like things that you need a little more distance for that are stationary. But for general purposes, I would go no higher than an 8. Again, that's just my personal opinion there. If you're on the younger end, for little kiddos, you honestly don't need binoculars. Tying 2 pieces of toilet paper rolls, painting them black, and putting a piece of twine over them is much better than giving an actual pair of binoculars to kids. Looking through binoculars it takes a little bit of work. And for a kid, holding up those binoculars or the paper towel rolls, holding them up, looking through it, that's going to be an easier and much more enjoyable experience for that child. Sorry, that got off on a tangent there. So we also have that second number. Oh, sorry, Andrew, you want to go back? So our second number there is, so we have 8X. So that was the ocular lens, is the 8X. The second number, that's the objective lens. So the lens that you're going to be looking, that's going to be gathering the light is pretty much what that is. And so the higher that number, the brighter your image will be. Again, I recommend 37, 42. Those will do perfect for any beginning birder. You could go higher than that, and you're going to get a brighter image, which is going to be better for you looking through it. But as you get bigger, you also add weight. And so then it gets a little heavier as well to hold. Other things to note on your binoculars, if you wear eyeglasses, definitely make sure you get a pair of binoculars that have an eye cup. They'll be different on different models. On my little Vortex here, the eye cup, I would just, if I was giving my binoculars to somebody with eyeglasses, I would just turn that knob down, just like that. And then a person with eyeglasses could see fine. And then if they're giving them back to me, I would turn them back up. Since I don't have eyeglasses, I would see with them as well. The other thing to remember when you get a new pair of binoculars, to make sure you adjust them for your eyes. One of the things that people wish I could do for them is adjust it for them so it's focused and it's good to go. But I can't do that because I don't know a lot about that person as an individual, beginning with the distance between their eyes. If one eye is stronger than the other, there's ways to adjust that as well. So really just get a pair of binoculars, go into your backyard and kind of play around with it. That'd be the best suggestion there. All right. So now that we know a little bit about using binoculars, let's talk about groups of birds. So when you see a bird through binoculars, you're gonna be like, whoa, cool, look at this awesome bird. I wonder what it is. That's just gonna be your natural reaction if you come across something you don't know. If you come across a bird that you don't know, group it with birds that you do know. So for size comparisons, pretty much a lot of people will know what a woodpecker looks like. Generally speaking, a lot of people will understand what a woodpecker looks like just based off of their silhouette next to a tree. They're gripping that tree. They got that tail, that tail that's at the trunk of the tree holding them in place, and they're hammering away. If you see that, you could know based off of the grouping of the birds that that is a type of woodpecker. Same things with ducks. If it looks duck-like, chances are you could group that into a duck-like grouping. A lot of times people know hawks, raptors. Again, so if you see one of them, you could group them together as well. And owls. Once you start grouping those birds together, then you could start to figure out different types of bird species. So I got that silhouette of a robin up there because almost everybody has seen a robin at some time. And having that common knowledge base allows us to look at an unknown bird and be like, okay, it's bigger than a robin, smaller than a robin in this case, and it looks like a woodpecker. So that's how we're going to start beginning to kind of tease out how to figure out an unknown bird. And it doesn't have to be a robin. Just the other day, I was outside with Cora, my daughter, and we were doing something. We were playing, swimming. I think we had the pool out, and we were swimming. And she says, "Papa, look, a chicken." And I'm like, "A chicken? Like, there's nobody around us has chickens." And I'm like, "Huh?" And I look over, and it's a pileated woodpecker. So if you don't know a pileated woodpecker, it's a very large woodpecker. And in her mind, she took the size comparison of a chicken that she knows very well from the times we go to like Susan or at her early childhood center, they have some chickens. So she knows that size. She saw an unknown bird, knew it was a bird, which was incredibly impressive to me, and made that comparison. Wow, that's a big bird. It looks like a chicken. That was, personally, it was really cool because that was actually our 60th bird species that we've seen in the yard here. And I was not expecting to see a pileated woodpecker just because it's not the right habitat. So you never know what you're going to see. Sorry for that tangent. Going back to the silhouettes, it's really important to know one or two particular birds really, really well, just so you could know it as a size comparison. A robin is a very common one. You could probably see that anywhere you go. Crows are another good one to use. It's larger than a crow, smaller than a crow. And then as you get better and more knowledgeable about different bird species, you can kind of tease it on that way. So let's see here. So as you start looking at birds as well, do note that birds all have beaks that are designed to do whatever the type of food that they eat is. So if the particular bird we're going to pick on this woodpecker again. All the woodpeckers, if you're looking at a bird and you don't know what it is, we grouped it as a woodpecker. Let's make sure it's a woodpecker. Look at its beak. Its beak is going to be chisel-like. Hummingbirds have that particular beak for feeding in nectar. Our sparrows, they're going to have a stout, thick bill for feeding on seeds. So all these different, again, it's just something to look at too when you're looking at an unknown bird. Look at those beaks. Also, pay attention to how it flies. Different birds fly different ways. Coming from the top here, if it's going almost like a roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. Kind of like, let me do that with my hands there. It's kind of doing that. That's going to be indicative of a finch or a woodpecker. That's called undulating. If it glides, flaps, glide, flap in a straight line, that's indicative of crows. I call this like the whoop-de-doo one. If it kind of goes in a spiral going up, that'll be indicative of hawks riding the spiral or riding the thermals. And then my favorite, kingbirds and wood pewees, they'll be on a tree perch, fly out and land straight on that same perch as well. So again, just things to think about when you're looking at an unknown bird. Pay attention to how it flies. The other question that often comes up when talking about backyard birds is, what field guide do I need? There is 1,000 different field guides of every shape and size. Try, when you're looking at a bird, use the field guide as a guide. Don't use it as like the end all be all. So if you see an unknown bird, you're looking at the beak, you're grouping it, you're just trying to make these mental notes using this, it's like a science notebook, jotting down what you're seeing. Use the guide as a follow-up. It's there to help you, but you could quickly become lost if you look up, you see a new bird, you're looking at it in your binoculars, like, oh, wow, this is an awesome new bird. I think it's a woodpecker. I'm going to go page through my guide. Oh, it could be this, it could be this, it could be. As you're looking through that guide, what you remember seeing may start to change based off of the pages that you're looking at. So write it down, take mental notes, really, really look at that bird a long time, and then finally go to the guide. What's the best guide? There's no, I mean, they're all generally the same. I picked up the Sibley bird book. That's like the Sibley birds for the Eastern United States, or Eastern North America. That was the first one I used, so that's the one I default to, just because I was familiar with the layout. There's little minor details that are different in each of them, but generally they're all laid out the same. They're all going to be based off of their taxonomy order, or based off of how they evolved throughout time. So in the beginning, you're going to have your water birds, followed by your hawks. Your doves are going to be in the middle, followed by your owls and your hummingbirds, and then at the end will be your passerines, like all of your songbirds. Again, all of the guides generally follow that order. If you have an older guide, some of the birds may be out of order, since the field guides followed the known taxonomic order at the time. So there have been changes based off of science and our understandings of bird evolution, but again, they're all in there based off of their taxonomic order. So there, well, again, that's just a picture of what the different field guides could look like. Now, I mentioned before you go to your field guide, if you have a science notebook or you have a notebook handy, really, really try to jot down all of those features of the bird. And you could draw that bird with shapes. Drawing birds with shapes is very, very easy. So all you need to start with is a circle, and a circle for the head, a triangle for its beak, oval for its body, another triangle for a wing, a rectangle for a tail. When I say drawing with birds, a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, I can't draw a bird. You could probably draw shapes fairly well. And these are what and then from the shapes, you could add some description words to kind of go through and remind you what you were looking at. So I can't stress enough when you're looking at backyard bird to really use like a science notebook to jot down unknown birds. So there, my picture, we got pictures of American goldfinch, and then my shapes of what I drew there, and we're good to go. So here's a real life example of a science notebook that I created. Nothing too fancy, straightforward. You can see that I'm not an artist, but based off of my descriptions, chances are you could figure out what that bird is. It says that it has a black eye ring. It has a big orange beak. It has a red crest. It's predominantly red. If there was an unknown bird species, I could use that those descriptions to go back to my field guide to try to figure out what it is. So here, we're going to go a little quick, but here's a real life example on why that could be challenged, why it's very important to use a science notebook for details you may miss. At a suet feeder, that's what this picture is. You may see a particular bird species show up like the one that shows up in the next picture. Now that bird species, if you just look at it at a glance, go back down to your bird book, that species could go away. But if you're looking at it and taking as detailed notes as you can, if it does fly away like it will do now, because that's what birds do, you have something to reference back to. And then when a bird flies back to that suet feeder, you could use your notes to try to figure out, is that the same bird or is that a different bird? In the next slide, you'll see that it is actually two different species of birds. On the left, it's a hairy woodpecker, so it's a larger one, and on the right, it's a downy woodpecker. So it's very, very important with an unknown bird to really jot it down in your science notebook. Any and all of the details as you possibly can while it's still fresh in your mind. So now with our last 10 minutes or so, we're gonna really dive into 10 common backyard birds that you could look for. Again, these are all birds that I think you'll have a really good chance of seeing at some time throughout the year. Our first one that I could promise you could attract to your backyard is an American goldfinch. So they are often known as the canary of the Midwest because they're so brightly yellowed. It's a really good bird for beginner birders to learn in the summer because nothing else is going to really look like it. The male is going to have this jet black crest on his cap on his head. He's going to be a striking yellow. The wings are going to be dark black with these thick white wing bars. Nothing else right now is going to look like that particular species. In your backyard, you can easily attract them with sunflower seeds or thistle and by growing milkweed, actually. Since the American goldfinch since they nest later in the summer, they actually use the milkweed tufts from milkweed to help line their nests. And they'll be doing that here shortly. One really cool fact about American goldfinches, they are amongst one of the strictest vegetarians in the bird world. They eat something predominantly like as a young 95+% strictly seeds. That's really cool because there is a particular bird species called a cowbird that like to lay eggs in other birds' nests. And when a cowbird lays that egg in American goldfinch's nest, it can't survive because that cowbird young needs insects, protein to grow, whereas our American goldfinch, they love that seed diet. So it's kind of a fun play there as well. So we can see goldfinches year round. Going on to our second bird, if I'm going to say you have to, I don't want to say you have to do anything, but if you were to choose one particular bird species to learn, it is the American robin. They are here throughout the whole year. They're very common. You can see them on any walk, any park, grass, eating worms after a rainy day. Actually, we had mentioned DDT with bald eagles. A lot of people don't realize that the American robin also was hurt by the use of DDT. Back in the 50s, Dutch elm disease was treated with DDT, so elm trees. And that would decompose down into the earthworm level, and then when the robins ate the earthworms, they got the DDT as well. But I would definitely spend time learning the American robin. Its belly is chestnut. On the males, they'll have that black head. You should be good. It's an easy one to identify, and you should be really good to see that one as well. That's a year-round species as well. Our next species is one of our snowbirds. These are our dark-eyed juncos. So it's kind of funny to think about birds coming here for the winter, but dark-eyed juncos love to come to the middle latitudes. So right now, they're probably up farther north, Minnesota, up into northern Canada breeding. But in the winter, if you put out any type of seeds, they will be at your feeder and in mass. They love to gather together. They love to eat sunflower seeds, millet. If you have some brush thrown around, like cuttings, trees that you cut in the fall, if you throw that around your feeders, they'll love to hide in there, pop out, eat some food, pop back in. They're pretty recognizable. When they fly, they have a V. So they're a V that is white. So when they fly on their tail feathers, you'll see this white V. Other things to look at for this is, you're going to have a dark gray body, a white belly, and a pink bill. Again, we can only see those in winter. Right now they're in northern Canada, but it's a really good winter one that you have no problem attracting. Our next one is our downy woodpecker. So our downy woodpecker, it's a very easy one, again, to attract to your backyard with suet or even hummingbird food. They love the sugary drink from hummingbird feeders. Oftentimes when I have all my feeders out for hummingbird migration, I will see a downy woodpecker there taking a drink of the mixture and also trying to get some of the ants that have grown on there. Also, a lot of people kind of don't like hummingbirds, or I'm sorry, woodpeckers, I think, because we also often associate or goodness gracious, I'm gonna say hummingbirds again. Woodpeckers pecking on our gutters or on the sides of our houses. Uh, they're actually not looking for food. A lot of times people are like, oh, why is this silly woodpecker banging on my house? There's no food there. That's how they communicate, through that drumming. So from the woodpecker's perspective, your gutters make that loud pop, pop, pop. That's like screaming on top of a mountain to that woodpecker saying, hey, this is my area. The other question I often get with woodpeckers is, how could they peck and not get a concussion? Or how do they peck and not hurt their beaks or their skulls? So on the next slide, we'll see just a quick anatomy of a woodpecker's skull. So if you look at this bone that goes above its eye, down through the back of its skull and out towards its tongue, that's called the hyoid bone. Hyoid bone, and that acts as like the seatbelt for the brain. So a lot of that boom, boom, boom is being absorbed by that bone. They also, if you look inside this picture here, the brain of the woodpecker, it's up against the skull, whereas our brain sloshed around in all of that fluid. So that skull acts as a protectant as well. There's some really cool videos online on how that works as well. Yes. So now we get to our Carolina chickadee. So this is a very common bird we could see throughout the year in any backyard feeder. They love to come into sunflower seed feeders, urban, suburban, no matter what. They got a black head, black cheek, white cheek patches, or black throat, white cheeks. Very, very easy to track. Nothing else really looks like them. If you ever disturb the birds, if you ever go outside and a bird kind of starts calling at you that flew off the feeder, chances are it was a chickadee, because they're almost like the first responders to the birds. When you hear a chickadee alarm call, all the other birds know that something's amiss. So how we know, I mentioned earlier that Carolina chickadees are the ones that we have in St. Louis. Pretty much if you look at this range map, this map from eBird is a sightings map. These are all of the sightings that were posted to eBird for Carolina chickadees. If you use your imagination on this map, it pretty much follows I-70. So anything south of I-70 is the Carolina chickadees range. Anything north of I-70 will be the black-cap chickadee range. So we click on that next one there. So as a comparison, on the top left, you have black-cap chickadees. On the bottom right, you have Carolina chickadees. St. Louis kind of falls right in the middle. But if you're birding in St. Louis, generally speaking, it's going to be a Carolina chickadee. They look the same. They sound slightly different. But for all intents and purposes, if you see it in St. Louis and south, it'll be a Carolina. St. Louis north of I-70, it'll be a black-cap chickadee. To muddy it even more, black-caps and Carolinas do hybridize, and they make their own calls. Our next one, if you ever are interested in learning bird calls, the Carolina wren is a very good one to begin with. Again, it's very common in backyards, and it sings up to 3,000 times in a day, throughout the whole day. I mean, it sounds like it's saying tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. If it has food available, it'll be in your backyard. Here's one that you may not know, but if you go outside this afternoon or this evening, you will see. So a chimney swift is our first neotropic migrant that we're going to talk about. So neotropic migrants are migratory birds that spend their summers or their breeding season in the United States, Canada, and spends their winters in Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, South America. So they're neotropical. Chimney swifts are incredibly common in urban areas. And it's a really good one to learn its silhouette as well, because nothing else looks like a chimney swift. It almost looks like a cigar with wings. A lot of people say it looks like a bat when it flutters. The cool thing about chimney swifts, their feet are actually too weak to cling on to tree branches. So they spend their entire life flying. The only time they stop flying is when they sleep, and they cling to, hence their name, chimneys, on the inside of chimneys or in a natural setting like a tree cavity or a cave. So food is spent flying. They catch flying insects. They spend bathing, flying. Everything they do is flying. And so you just think about the thought of flying nonstop from South America, from Peru, Brazil, and only sleeping on the inside of chimneys, and then the rest of your day is spent flying. It's crazy to think about. But if you live in an urban area in September, definitely go outside. You will see thousands of them at sunrise and sunset, especially next to Maplewood, Richmond Heights, the school complex. And those towers there, you could see tens of thousands of swifts. It's incredible. My favorite one that I had to throw on here is the Eurasian tree sparrow. So the Eurasian tree sparrow it has a really good story. And the story is that in the 1860s, 1870s, 12 Eurasian tree sparrows were brought to St. Louis by German immigrants. So I would assume the birds were kept in captivity in the German immigrants' home and escaped. And so with St. Louis being so similar to the breeding grounds that it would have native Eurasia, it is native in, it thrived. But it's only thrived in St. Louis and north, up to like Hannibal. So not too far. And people throughout the United States come to St. Louis to get this particular bird, the Eurasian tree sparrow, off of their birding list or their bird checklist. And we have it in our backyards. So people get so jealous that without even knowing it, we have this life bird that people will spend their whole lives looking for. Now it looks like the the house sparrow. The big difference is that little black circle cheek patch that you see there from colorations. From an evolution standpoint, the house sparrow and the Eurasian tree sparrow are not at all related. I mean, they're far off the taxonomy change there. But from a visual standpoint, the biggest difference is that little black cheek patch. And it can only be found in urban areas in St. Louis. Kind of fun. Another common one is our mourning dove. They are, goodness, you could attract them with any types of seeds, from millet, sunflower seeds. They'll come. Mourning doves make a pretty simple nest where it's just like a platform of dropping sticks. And because they don't spend a lot of time making their nest, they could have 3 or 4 broods or clutches in a year. With the idea being that they don't want to spend too much time making this nest, raising 2, 3, 4 broods in a year. It takes about 14 days for a hatchling to hatch. Chances are that nest is going to fall down in the first storm, so they're going to have to do it again as well. Most of the food that a mourning dove is going to eat is seeds. About 99% of its diet will be seed. And we can see them year-round here in St. Louis. And our last fun one is snow geese. So although we can't attract them to our backyard, in winter you will see them flying overhead, and they will fly in wavy, crazy V's of upwards to thousands upon thousands of birds. If you go out in the middle of a clear night in February and March, you will hear this noise high in the sky. If it's a clear day in February or March, you will hear snow geese in flight, no matter where you live. I mean, it's just incredible. Right now, these particular birds are in the Arctic, so in the Arctic tundra breeding. They'll come down during migration, but in winter, or just after winter, as they start to go back up to their migratory ranges, you'll see tens of thousands of them. If you ever want to go on a bird trip, there is National Refuge out by Kansas City, and you can see hundreds and 100,000, like legitimately hundreds of thousands of snow geese on the water. It's a sight to see, and it's a really good bird to learn flight patterns with, since they're going to be in these wavy V's. So I know I'm kind of over my 2 o'clock time frame. I'm going to keep going. If you have to duck out, I do apologize. Andrea is recording this presentation, so she'll send it out to everybody. So if you ducked out at 2 o'clock, please note that we're still recording, and you will get all of the information that you missed. So sorry, Andrea, if you were going to say that. So we got 10 birds that we want to attract to our backyard. So what do they need? Like any living thing, they need food, water, shelter. Food is the easy thing. The best way to do it is let nature do what nature wants to do and plant plants. Native plants are the easiest thing to do to attract birds. Let me page through here to our next slide. There you go, sorry about that. So native plants is the best way to attract wildlife, in this case birds. A few plants that are really, really good to plant will be our Heleniaceae, so like our sunflowers, our echinacea, black-eyed Susans. I mentioned milkweeds for our goldfinches here. Cardinal flower is a really good plant for hummingbirds. Pretty much any native plant that produces seeds, fruits, or nuts will provide birds with food throughout the whole year. Always, in my opinion, the first step for attracting any wildlife should be like a native food source. Allow nature to do what nature's going to do. The garden has on the garden's webpage, I got a link here that I could put up later. They have a list of bird-friendly plants. In a nutshell, you can't go wrong with any of our sunflowers, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans. And by planting native plants, it's also a really good habitat for insects. So some birds aren't like our goldfinches that love to eat seeds. They need protein to raise their young. Our Carolina chickadee that I keep talking about is a great example of needing caterpillars to grow it, to feed its young. If you've never read the book, Bringing Nature Home by Doug Talmy, it's a really, really good read about gardening and doing this in your backyard. So Bringing Nature Home, in his book, he explains that about 96-ish% of all terrestrial birds feed their young insects or caterpillars. And with that, we began to look at, in a study with Doug Talmy and the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, they began looking at Carolina chickadees. And looking at the Carolina chickadees, they found that for one clutch, so one hat, like 3 birds, one clutch, they're young, one pair of Carolina chickadees needed to feed 5,000 caterpillars to the clutch of 3. And that was over the course of 16 days. So that's one pair of chickadees. Scale that up to our backyard being, let's say we have a nesting pair of Carolina chickadees here. That's 5,000 caterpillars that they need to eat. Another nesting pair just down the road. That's another 5,000 caterpillars. We can't replicate that with supplemental food sources. That can only be replicated with native plants. Some of the best native plants, if you have them on your property already, are oak trees. They host the highest variety of caterpillar species, but really for the insects world and the caterpillar world, really plant those native plants and get a variety of them, because that way we get a variety of caterpillars. So for instance, our Carolina chickadees could feed their young. Again, just think about that, 5,000 caterpillars over 16 days. That's like almost like 400 caterpillars a day. Crazy to think about. Planting a wide variety of native plants isn't always an option. If you wanted to go the supplemental food source, bird feeders are the easy way to do it. You could put bird food out throughout the entire year. Putting out bird food during migration, that's okay. having a bird feeder out is not going to stop that particular bird from continuing on to its migration. It knows what it has to do. It'll do it. It's just stopping at our yards for a feeder, for a rest. On our left-hand side, we have what I would almost call like a house feeder. I think that'd be the easiest way to describe that. So the house feeder protects the seeds that are inside it from the elements and loosely protects them from squirrels and raccoons and other things. So on the top one, I have a typical one you could probably find at any home gardening store. On the bottom one, it's a little more specialized. So the bottom left, it's a little more specialized since it's got that caged mesh on the outside and a small little circle for the birds to get in. That was by design to try to keep out starlings and try to attract more wrens. You also have platform feeders. So those would be the top middle one and the top right one. The top middle one, that platform feeder is sitting on the bottom. Again, you can put any type of seed on there. Our ground feeding birds like our doves would love that. Also the squirrels love that as well. So use that sparingly if you can, or just note that your squirrels are going to feed there as well. The top right one is another platform feeder that I put up on a shepherd's hook to get it off the ground to try to deter squirrels as best as I can. It's not possible, but it does the job a little bit. Going down on the bottom right, we know the common hummingbird feeders. Hummingbird feeders are a very easy thing to put out. You can put them out now. Right now, as they're nesting, their hummingbirds aren't necessarily going towards hummingbird feeders for food. They're getting a lot more insects for protein, but definitely you can still put it out there. If you do have your hummingbird feeders out, especially with our temperatures getting 93, 95, 100 degrees here soon, you really do need to change out that sugar water, that sugar mixture, because it can get mold with being in the heat. But I have mine out. I think I have a nesting pair coming. I've seen a male and a female, so I think they may be a pair. I don't know that for sure. Come to it, but I do change it every 2 days. Another thing, if you purchase hummingbird food, some researchers say that red dye isn't the best for them. The hummingbirds are more attracted to the red flower that the hummingbird feeder usually depicts, not necessarily the red dye. You can make a mixture yourself at home with sugar and water. And our last feeder that we haven't talked about is in the middle here, the middle bottom, and that's kind of like a tube feeder. It's got small little holes in there again to try to keep some of the moisture out as well. So going on, let's look at some food. So we have all these different types of we have all these different types of food or bird feeders. What type of food should we put in there? By and large, if you just want a general food to put out there, sunflower seeds, black oil sunflower seeds are the way to go. You're going to get the widest variety of species coming to black oil sunflower seeds. If I was to rank them, black oil sunflower seeds would be number 1. Number 2 would be like millet. You could buy a mixture of the sunflower seeds and the millet. That works too. Oftentimes what you'll see sometimes is birds will pick around what they want and discard onto the ground what they don't want. So personally I try to keep them separated. So the bird that's going to the black oil sunflower seeds are going to eat the black oil sunflower seeds. That's just me kind of being a little OCD about that. The downside of using sunflower seeds, squirrels love them. They will come to them too. Same thing with the millet. Another food source that you can put out there is thistle. If you want to attract our goldfinches, you can put thistle in a tube feeder or a sock feeder, and they will love you for doing that. Like everything, the downside with thistle is if you put it out and it gets moisture on it, and you don't change that out quick enough, that moisture in the thistle, excuse me, will start to get mold and some bacteria, and it's really bad for the birds. So if you use thistle, by all means use it, but definitely clean it out if after a heavy rain. Suet is a really good one, especially in the winter, as some of our birds need that fatty substance to get through, especially a really cold, hard winter. Suet's a really good one for attracting birds. If you do put out suet, keep in the back of your mind. Raccoons and possums also love that as well. So you may need some kind of cage mechanism to keep those little mammals out.
Matt, there was a question. Matt, there was a question in the chat about suet feeders. If you could keep those out all year round.
Yeah. So the picture that I have here, it has a no mess wrapper, no melt resistance formula. You could put it as we get into the summer months. You could put out like a no melt formula suet out there, and it'll be fine. It does kind of get. It's a very interesting texture. It gets kind of gnarly look to me. It's kind of funny feeling, but definitely you could, if you have like a no melt one, you could put it out there. If you have just like a general one that you made yourself, I would probably recommend only doing that in the winter, so you just don't have a mess underneath your feeder. My personal favorite one to put out are dried mealworms. It attracts bluebirds, wrens, woodpeckers, nuthatches, titmice. Again, anybody that's looking for those proteins. It kind of keeps some of the squirrels away. Since they're really not eating mealworms. If there is a downside, the downside is starlings. The European starlings come to my feeder. They legitimately have me patterned. They know what time of day that I go outside each morning to put out my feed. They will stage above me, wait till I put my mealworms out, and then when I fly away, they come down to the feeders. So I have to stagger my feeding times to get away from them. Other foods you can put out that I don't have pictures of, you can put out fruit for orioles if you have those in your backyard. I've never done that and haven't had good luck on that, but it can be done. The other thing to think about with your, oh crap.
Matt, hopefully the phone battery is not dying. Everyone stay tuned. This is perfectly normal. I did see that there were some other questions in the chat, and we will get to those. So yeah, bird baths. That's next. Does anyone have bird baths in their yard, in their garden that the birds like? Let us know. Oh yes, we're getting some yeses. Good. Wonderful. I wonder if it's, oh yeah. No, Andrea will not be tap dancing, sorry. Shelter. Nest boxes. Does anyone use nest boxes to attract birds in their yard? Let us know. Also, and sorry, Matt, when Matt comes back, he'll have a much better explanation of all of this than I do. And some of you have asked if there will be. Sorry, Don?
Looks like he's back.
Is he back? Great.
Yep, can you hear me, Andrea?
Yes, hear you great.
Awesome, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Here, do you want to go back? I was trying to
You want me to go back?
offer some commentary.
I'm sure you did a great job.
I did. It's fine. So here's where we are. Nest boxes.
All right, nest boxes. So if you wanted to if you wanted to build a nest box for some of your critters, Nest Watch is a great place to go as a resource to try to figure out the particular species or the particular home
that a particular bird species needs. Not all bird houses are built the same. Different birds need different entrance holes. Oh, you're good, Andy. We could go back to the, yeah, we're good there.
Okay.
It gets tricky because a lot of people love putting out bluebird houses to try to attract bluebirds or wrens. And they need a very particular hole size, about 1.5 inches. The tricky part is house sparrows will quickly move into there if the bluebird doesn't get there first. To try to keep the house sparrows out, you have to get a smaller diameter hole size, and that really limits the amount of birds you could have to roughly chickadees. So if you really want to attract a bluebird, the best way to do it is put a bluebird home out, but do note that you may have house sparrows coming in and out competing that bluebird for your home. It's kind of a give and take. There's no easy way of doing it because that hole size has to be no larger, no smaller than 1.5 inches for that bluebird to nest in. But you could try to scare off the house sparrows and go shoo shoo. But you could always provide natural locations. So again, going back to the native plantings, providing shrubs and trees at different levels and different heights allows the birds plenty of opportunities to make a natural nest as well. So here we have some eastern wood peewees just in like a small little tree branch fork for their nest. And although it's not natural, our barn swallows there in the bottom are up underneath an awning of a barn with their nest as well. So here we will go to our birding app. So if you're like me, I'm a little more old school, I think. I mean, if you could see my desk right now, there's 10 or 11 different bird books on there right now. But I know that not everybody likes to have actual hard copies of books, and there is a movement for doing things digital. Well, we have plenty of resources available to help ID any birds you have out in the field with your smartphone. One of my favorite that I like to use in the middle is Merlin Bird ID. That one is made by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's a very, very simple one to use. It just asks you color, general shape, general size, and then it gives you probabilities based off of your location. Now, it's not going to say this is exactly what you have. It'll give you a probability. It could be this. It's a pretty good interface, but just know that sometimes it's not 100% accurate. That's a really good one to download, especially if you have a bigger tablet or maybe like a Chromebook that you could take. It's a fairly large file, but it's a really good app. My other favorite one to use personally is BirdNet. It's tricky in the sense that you're outside with your smartphone, you hear a bird's call that you don't know what it is, you put it up, it records that sound. The tricky part is it's going to pick up if you're in an area with a lot of different birds, it's going to pick up different species of birds and may jumble up the sounds that you're hearing. Or if you have a particular song you want to hear, but it's recording something else, it gets a little tricky there. But if it's a really, really good one to have on hand, if you're in your backyard, something's singing, you don't know what it is, it's fairly loud, pretty close to you, put that up, it'll record the sound, and again, tell you a probability of what it is. And also, my favorite feature of that, I'm a very visual learner, so you actually get to see the sound. But I don't know if that makes sense. You get to see like the sound graphs happening as well. Same thing with Larkwire. That one I think is only on the Apple Play Store. I am an Android person, so I've never played around with that one. And same thing with, then there's the other Raptor ID one as well. So with all this knowledge, if you want to do something with your knowledge, there is citizen science opportunities. So eBird, I referenced that before. eBird is, think of it almost as like iNaturalist. So if you're familiar with iNaturalist, where you take a picture of it, you post it, it gets used for research throughout the world. Same thing with eBird, but it's only for birds. You see a bird, you have a checklist. You can put it into eBird. It keeps track of that bird for you, and it automatically organizes it in a useful way. Excuse me. And then as researchers look at bird population changes, dynamics, they could pull our citizen science research, data into their research as well. Yep, okay, we're good. So the other one that's a really fun one to do on the bottom is the Great Backyard Bird Count in February. It takes a winter snapshot of all of the winter birds right before they go back north to their breeding grounds. So if you're bored in late February, mid-February, you have nothing to do, the Great Backyard Bird Count's a really good one to do. You just look at your backyard for 15 minutes and count the birds and the species that you see. With that, I do apologize for my feed cutting out earlier. I'm so sorry that you had to do that, Andrea, and jump on there. But with that, if you have any questions now, feel free to shoot them in the chat. Or, Andrea, if you're okay with people